A very significant, widespread, and potentially historic severe weather outbreak is expected tomorrow across portions of the southeastern United States into the mid-Atlantic, bringing the potential for very widespread damaging wind gusts, some potentially reaching up to 85 to 90 miles an hour in some localized areas, as well as the potential for several tornadoes, some of which could be strong to potentially violent, as well as the potential for isolated large to very large hail. In this weather forecast, I'm going to discuss the official Storm Prediction Center forecast for this event, how some of the weather models are showing this event could play out, and what you can all do to prepare for this event. Anyways, let's get straight into this weather forecast. First of all, looking at our severe weather outlook for tomorrow, you can actually see we do have a moderate risk of severe weather from northeastern South Carolina all the way into central Maryland there, and our enhanced risk of severe weather extends from southeastern Georgia all the way into eastern Pennsylvania, so we do actually have a very large area for significant severe weather tomorrow. If you look at the bottom there, you can actually see we have over 12.5 million people just in the moderate risk there. Looking at our tornado risk for tomorrow, you can see we have a 15% tornado risk from northeastern South Carolina all the way into central and western Maryland, and our 10% tornado risk extends from southeastern Georgia all the way into south central Pennsylvania, and our 5% tornado risk extends from northern Florida all the way into south central New York there. And we actually do have a SIG 1 area all the way from northern Florida all the way into central and south central New York there, so a very large area of significant tornadoes. And if this continues to uptrend a little bit or stay the same, there's potential they could add a SIG 2 area somewhere mainly within that 15%, 10% area there, so watch out for later outlooks to see if that happens. Looking at our wind risk for tomorrow, you can see we have a rare 60% damaging wind risk from northeastern South Carolina all the way into central Maryland there, and that is very rare because normally in previous years that would be a high risk automatically basically, but now you have to have a SIG 2 area there, and we only have a SIG 1 area, but we can still see some isolated wind gusts up to 85 or 90 miles an hour as I said earlier. And looking at our 45% area that extends from eastern Pennsylvania all the way into most of South Carolina there, and our 30% area extends from southeastern Georgia all the way into south central New York there. So a very large area could see at least widespread damaging wind gusts. Some areas could see some very significant damaging wind gusts there. Many wind gusts could reach over hurricane force, especially in that 60% wind risk area, so make sure you watch out for that. I'm going down to our discussion here. Let's see if we're talking about anything for specific wind gusts. We're talking about particularly damaging wind gusts, some strong tornadoes. I'd like to note down here for tornado risk, they are talking about the potential for some long track and strong tornadoes, potentially with those discrete supercells that have the line, and there will be some widespread damaging wind gusts with a QLCS. Not talking too much about our actual wind speeds and intensities and stuff. We're talking about 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram of Cape there, as well as some pretty good wind shear. So we have pretty good instability and wind shear for tomorrow actually. And finally, looking at our hail risk, you can see much lower hail risk for tomorrow. Our 15% area extends from south central Virginia there all the way into northern Florida, and we have a SIG 1 area across mainly just central North Carolina into South Carolina, southeastern Georgia, northern and eastern Florida there. Could see some very large hail on isolated spots, but generally hail is not going to be our biggest threat for tomorrow. Next, looking at some of our weather models here, starting with the HRRR, starting at 6Z on Monday here, you can see generally by that time our storms are going to be in eastern Kentucky, western Ohio, into central Alabama, starting to move into western Georgia, eastern Tennessee there. And by the time we get to 10Z, you can see we have a very large open warm sector there. Our storms are moving into western Virginia, western North Carolina, all the way into the Atlanta metro area. And if we go to 12Z, you can see our very, very large open warm sector across much of the southeast and the mid-Atlantic. I actually do want to go briefly to our dew points here to see just how large our warm sector is. You can see very large warm sector there as 60-degree dew points all the way from eastern central Maryland down into northern Florida most likely, although that is cut off here. And you can see as we go later into the day, that actually spreads farther north and we get greater moisture on land. So very good dew points there. By 18Z, we still have a very large warm sector. Going to our instability here, you can see we do actually have some pretty good cape out there, it seems. Around 500 to 1,500 joules per kilogram, I mean. And you can see that generally spreads to the east. We could have better instability, but generally that's still pretty good instability there. Now we're going to go back to our precipitation here, starting at 12Z there. You can see we have some semi-discrete supercells forming out there, maybe some discrete supercells forming, and generally the southern part of our line actually becomes more semi-discrete supercell, more than damaging winds. And then you can see up north, more of a damaging wind threat there. Well, we could still see some strong to intense tornadoes up there. By 2021Z, it's already moving towards Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Fairfax area, I believe, moving into eastern North Carolina, and by 0Z on Tuesday is starting to move off land there before eventually moves off of the land. Going to our next model, this is the wrap. We are using the 15Z because that has a longer range here. But you can actually see our line may be a little bit further east there, but by 10Z it's already moved through Atlanta there. You can see we have plenty of semi-discrete supercells out there by 12Z. Going to look at our surface moisture there, you can see very good dew points there into the low to mid, maybe even a little bit of upper 60s. If that continues to sustain over the day there, as we even get towards the coast there, the dew points are still very good. And then we're going to go to our instability here real quick. You can see pretty good instability there. Maybe up to 1,000 joules per kilogram in a widespread area there. So that will be very good for our storms. And then I'm briefly going to go to wind shear here. So starting at 925 millibars for tomorrow, you can see generally our wind shear is going to be more to the south there. So let's see how much, and you can see it's basically 40 to 50 knots across a widespread area there. Some areas reaching up to 60 knots of wind shear there. So 60 to 70 knots of wind shear in some areas there actually. That would be very good for our storms. If that's still to the south there. Going up to 500 millibars, you can see generally it's going to be still kind of to the south there. But generally it's going to mainly be further back there. There's our greatest wind shear. We can still see some very strong upper level wind shear there, potentially reaching 60 to 80 knots in a widespread area there. You can see all the way back there, western Ohio, central Kentucky, central Tennessee, reaching well over 100 knots of wind shear there. And then going back to our storms here real quick to look at how our storms progress through the day. Let me find it here. Summary reflectivity. You can see generally we have a semi-discrete supercell, so it's kind of messy here, but can still see our line more semi-discrete on the southern side, more linear on the northern side, and you can see that brings a very significant damaging wind threat for places like Washington, D.C., Fairfax, all the way into eastern Pennsylvania there before it all moves offshore around sunset. And we only have one more model to look at now. We are looking at the NAM now. So first of all, looking at our simulated reflectivity, you can see generate by 12Z is starting to move for Atlanta, so maybe a little bit delayed compared to our other models, but we'll give more time for supercells to develop. You can see a couple of supercells in eastern North Carolina there, which could be interesting. Next, going to our dew points, you can see, if you look at our dew points, you can see very good moisture there of low to mid 60s there across a widespread area. Maybe not extending nearly as far north, but still very good dew points there. And then going to our convective products, looking at our instability here, you can see maybe not as good instability though. Still, Southeastern Georgia and to South Carolina, Southern North Carolina have the best instability there, around 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE. That's likely where our greatest tornado threat will be. But even up towards South Central Pennsylvania, we still have 500 to 1,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE there. And then looking at our wind speeds for our wind shear, you can see 12Z Monday, we have a widespread area 40 to 50 knots of lower level wind shear. And if we get into later in the afternoon, that starts to increase to 60 to 70 knots of wind shear in some areas there, which could be very, very bad for our storms. I mean, like, intensifying there. If you want storms, that's very, very good. And then going to our 500 millibar wind speeds, and again, that's probably mostly to the south. 500 millibar wind speeds also mostly to the southwest, it appears, maybe. And you can see we have a widespread area of 50 to 60 knots of wind shear there. Before late in the afternoon, that goes all the way up to 80 to 90 knots of upper level wind shear there. So that would be very favorable for our storms there. And finally, finishing off our simulated reflectivity here real quick. You can see as we get to 15Z, you can see some semi-discrete supercells there. More as we get towards 18Z, you can see the southern part of the storm is more semi-discrete. And as we get to 21Z, that's about the same time the HRR and the RAP have the storms at 18Z. So that could be a little like 3-hour delay around the storms. That would give more time for semi-discrete supercells to form there. And then eventually by 0Z, that's when it's moving through portions of eastern North Carolina, eastern Virginia, Washington, D.C. And then it all moves offshore by 6Z on Tuesday, so maybe a little bit delayed there. So, many of you are probably still wondering what you can do to prepare for this very significant severe weather outbreak. Well, first of all, communicate with everyone in your house where you are going to go in case of a significant severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning being issued for your area, preferably underground or in a storm shelter, but just try to get to the most interior room on the lowest floor of a sturdy building, such as your house, the bottom floor of your apartment building, as you can. And also, make sure you have an emergency kit in case something significant happens, because if something significant happens, you could be trapped for days during search and rescue. So make sure you have a first aid kit, you have enough food for a few days, enough water for a few days, you have a NOAA weather radio, or something else to alert you of severe weather. And speaking of that, make sure you have multiple ways to receive severe weather alerts, such as flash flood warnings, in case we get some of those, but mainly tornado warnings and severe thunderstorm warnings, like such as a cell phone, a NOAA weather radio, a weather app, anything that can give you a weather alert. You need multiple ways to receive alerts in case one of them fails during this event. Anyways, that is all we have for today's weather forecast. Make sure that if you are in any of the impacted areas from the mid-Atlantic all the way into the southeastern United States. I have multiple ways to receive weather alerts, and also I'm going to be live from 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time to 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow in case anything significant happens. And also, make sure to share this video with your friends and family if you have any family in those impacted areas there. And I will see you in the next live stream later today or in another video in the future. Goodbye.